The film Trauma by Hassam Dagani from Iran is inspired by true events and presents a chilling and intense narrative of justice and revenge through the eyes of a survivor of assault. The film portrays a survivor taking matters into her own hands in response to violence. How do you think it handles the theme of justice, and what are your thoughts on how films can explore women's responses to violence without glorifying harmful actions?
Yeah, so this film is hard to watch, and I think it's important to to emphasize that it's from Iran, and in Iran today, women are, struggling for their freedom in all ways. Women who appear in the street without a head covering get lashes, they're imprisoned. There's been the Women Life Freedom movement going on for a couple of years now. Women, it is so bad for women that they, in some cases, would rather die than continue to live under the gender apartheid that they live under. So I really see this film as an Iranian film, right? Because of, I mean, I guess I don't want to give it away, but like the justice that is carried out in the film, the rage, I would also call this film, I mean, I'm sorry to use the term, but this was like revenge porn, right? Like that's what this film, that was the thought that went through my mind. Um, in the context of Iran, it made a lot of sense. And where women have absolutely no agency or ability to fend for themselves or to get justice, you have to take justice into your own hands. Um, because talk about being vulnerable. So I felt the film was very powerful and very telling of the frustration and lack of power that women have in Iran. So it was hard to watch, but it also was like, if I see it through that lens, it was very satisfying, right? Like her perpetrator met his justice. What was the second question that you asked me? I don't remember what you said, what the second one was.
I said, how can films explore women's responses to violence without glorifying harmful actions?
Yeah, okay. So that's a real, so yeah, so th this was definitely, there were definitely some harmful actions in this film. So I think again, so again, not again, but what's important is that when we're talking about violence against women, how much shame that women have for having had violence perpetrated against them as though like it shouldn't have happened to them or, they did something wrong to make it happen. Um, but there is rage. There is rage, right? That rage at being powerless, rage at something being done to you that you did not ask for, that you did not deserve, and that there's no recourse for that. So I can understand why there would be rage, and also like rage is as a way to protect yourself. Like to get to that point of anger, then you can go into like animal mode and fend off an attacker, right? So the rage absolutely has a purpose. I think making a film like this with the scenes that we saw, I think it's the perfect place to do that, right? Because it's cathartic as well, right? To watch that film again, like thank goodness I'm not a victim of sexual violence, and this film like really I really was put in the shoes of someone who was and is trying to like make it to the next day, right? Like that's kind of like how is she going to live with herself after what has happened? Because her life will be changed forever. She might have gotten her moment of justice, but she will never be the same. Her life is changed forever. And so I think like being able to have a creative outlet such as a film or a poem or a story or some other form of art to work that rage out is really healthy. It's really good, even though we know in cases of domestic violence or other forms of violence against women, when women do take their revenge, quite often they're the ones that end up in prison, and that's a whole other story, right? So rage on the screen, I think that's a really appropriate place to show that that's a shared feeling. It's not a wrong feeling, and that the wrong has been done to the woman.
I think that the word that you use, catharsis, I think that's the perfect word I would use to describe this film. You said earlier that the number of women who have been assaulted or experienced gender-based violence has raised to from 1 in 4 to 1 in 3. And I think many women who watch this film might feel that kind of cathartic, just kind of relief, you know. I think it is important to remember to separate art from reality. I don't think we should ever encourage women I'll say in our country or in general to carry out actions like this for their own protection. I know that the judicial system is far from perfect, but I think it is a responsibility for filmmakers to show uh, abusers accountable for their actions. I think there is a growing amount of women in films being assaulted or being harmed as a plot point. And I think that that's leading to people gradually becoming desensitized to seeing violence enacted on women. And I think that's very harmful. So I think on the flip side, seeing a woman commit violence in response to something that happened to her, I think it's, I think a lot of people will feel just some kind of like, oh, justice didn't happen for me, but at least I could see it happen for this character. And I think that films in general should present, even if they have a more artistic way of showing accountability. I think that they should also present a higher level of constructive views towards justice or maybe healing. Um, do you think that do you think that films nowadays are falling short in addressing violence against women?
Oh, that's an interesting question. So I can't say that I get the chance to watch a lot of films outside of women's voices now, and mostly we work in documentary. Um, What I can say is that, again, I always try to find the positive, right? Because otherwise, like, it's just too depressing. So when I watch my favorite movies from the 90s when I was a teenager, I am horrified by the way women are treated, by the way women are portrayed, by the lines that they've been given. I mean, oh my gosh, it's like, I'm like, how, I can't watch some of my favorite movies anymore. It's just, it's like, it's disgusting. Like, I can't, and I certainly don't want my kids to watch those movies either because it they just those movies did not age well. Let's put it that way. But so what's the positive of that is that how far have we come, right? So yes, I understand there are many films that continue to write women in poor ways. Women still have fewer speaking lines than men across the board. There are still fewer women behind the camera. There's still ageism in Hollywood. Of course, all of these things exist, but just in my like anecdotal experience of whether I'm watching series or I'm watching films or or like random whatevers that people recommend, I see that women excuse me, have much more diverse roles. They're much more real, they're much more textured. They're real people, right? They're not caricatures of this, male defined femininity. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I'm not saying that at all, but I don't think it's necessarily the norm anymore. And and as we've seen, like movies like Barbie, being one of the highest grossing films of history, right? Like that's a huge testament to like the power of women to show up and buy a ticket to a film, like success. Like when we like what we see of ourselves, we can make that known. It's like, consumer power, yeah? So I think I try to focus on that. While I know that many people are still consuming pretty shoddy things of women's representation, but at least the women's voices now, we are not doing that, right? Like we're trying to push content that shows women in all of their different facets and experiences, artistically or otherwise. Like this film was more, even though it's a technically a documentary, it was like sort of in a narrative presentation. And we don't really know if that really happened. Like what we can assume that the woman was sexually assaulted, but we don't know what happened after, if this was her imagination or her catharsis or if it really did go down like that.
Mhm. Um, I know I mentioned earlier that there's a growing amount of women in films nowadays that are being portrayed in ways that they have violence enacted on them as a plot point, or even sometimes to build some kind of strength in the male characters. I wanted to ask, what role do you think that filmmakers have in shaping perceptions of accountability?
Oh, I think filmmakers have all kinds of power in shaping accountability, perceptions of accountability. So if you're not doing a documentary, right? Like you can create the world that you want to see. So what is the world that you want to see? Like, but I've come to the bad things will always happen. There will all I don't think we can eradicate violence against women entirely. Sadly, I just think this is what humans do. but we can mitigate it and we can be vigilant and like I would never give up on wanting to eradicate, right? That's the goal. So films as a form of art, especially like I was saying, if they're not a documentary film, you have a creative license to be like, what would the ideal situation of what happened to that, like, taking this film trauma, if it weren't an Iranian film and portraying like the Iranian experience, and if it were a country in Scandinavia where perhaps there's a little bit better accountability for men who commit violence. I actually don't know that, so like don't quote me on that because I don't know, but I'm assuming. Um, yeah, what would that look like? What would that feel like? And I think that that's kind of a fun thing too. But you're bringing up this point like where it's like a plot point or like something to like reel us in. Like it's more like the why does that thing reel us in? Like why is that violence something that like gets us excited, in whatever way? And why is that something like that we want to watch? Do we want to watch it? I don't know. And like and then how it's handled after. Like, yeah, I think I would be so curious to have that conversation with some of our filmmakers, actually. And, like how much are they trying to create the world that they want to see versus the world that's around us to give us an opportunity to reflect on who we are, right? Because either you can make a film that shows the worst of humanity, and then it's like a mirror being held up and being like, see how awful we are? Like, don't you want to do better? Or you can create a film that is not the mirror, it's the ideal, and then that starts conversations of like, oh, how do we get there? That felt really good, right? Like, yes, bad things happen and we can address them in a healthy way. Yeah.
Yeah, there's I read comics and there's this very big archetype called women in refrigerators. Basically, there was a very popular superhero and he came home and he found that his wife was killed and put in his refrigerator, and that made him become a stronger superhero, give him more depth, give him more, basically make him more interesting. And that became kind of like a common thing that started becoming more and more prominent in comics. And I think that over time, we're seeing that gradually more and more in film. And I just think that education is really important. I think that the media we consume is always going to shape our perceptions and our societal norms to an extent. I know that at the time, the things that I was watching when I was in middle school and high school, I was way too immature to be watching things like that. And looking back, now that I'm older, I can see I shouldn't have been watching things like that. But at the time, I thought that was normal. I thought that that kind of behavior was normal. And I think that there needs to be a more diverse form of education in media. I think that if it doesn't necessarily have to be so cookie cutter. I know that a lot of kids, a lot of teenagers, they like or they think they like more adult things. But I think that if it's portrayed in a way that is accessible and entertaining, or like you said, I'm not sure why people find violent things entertaining, but I think that if we can reframe these things and put them in media in a different way, maybe repackage it, I think that could possibly mitigate the growing increase of the, I want to say, the dehumanization of women in film and in media. That's at least what I hope for. Um,
Excuse me, you bring up a lot of really good points and a lot of really hopeful points. Media definitely shapes us. I definitely think there's a responsibility of, caretakers to try to moderate some of the content that young people are watching. Like there's so little control with, social media and everything. We're just sort of like really in a glut, right? Like there's just so much out there. I think you bring up the most important point of the need for better media literacy, especially of young people. I read something recently, like 94% of high schoolers, almost 2,000 were surveyed, said like how badly they need media literacy, like between fake news and real news, disinformation, misinformation, actual information. They just don't have the tools to sift through it all. And quite honestly, from my talking with teachers and things in different schools, teachers aren't living in the same social media sphere that their students are, so they don't even know what's going on, right? And then that goes for parents as well. So we're definitely like in a new frontier with information technology, of course. But yeah, I mean, film definitely is one of the most important things that can harm us and help us in becoming a better society. I mean, for sure, we believe that at Women's Voices now.
Yeah, and I just hope that more films that have positive representation and better education um, will hopefully mitigate the media literacy issue. Um, but also, I do want to put some of the responsibility back on the filmmakers because, like I said earlier, I was watching things that were way too mature or way too out there for my age range. But
Yeah.
looking back, they were my age in those TV shows like for example the TV show Skins. It's super mature, it's super heavy, but they were teenagers. And also a recent show Euphoria, they're portrayed by people in their 20s, but they are playing high school
Teenagers.
characters in
Yeah.
these very extreme, very problematic situations. But I do think that at the end of the day, it does fall partly on the filmmaker and also on the parents of the children and personal responsibility for the teenagers, whoever is consuming the media themselves. I think everybody has a part to play in this, and hopefully we can move towards better representation and healthier portrayals of women, men in certain situations.
Yeah. That got me thinking it'd be so incredible if there was a like a high school course that showed things like Euphoria, like bring, name the elephant in the room, right? Put it on a screen in front of teenagers, watch it and be like, what's wrong with this, right? Like, is this really how you want to be behaving and acting? And like, what happens next? Where do you go from here? Like, because there was a Girls' Voices Now alumna who actually we had a conversation after the program, and she was telling me about Euphoria and how it made her so uncomfortable. And she just finished our program where she just felt so empowered as like a young woman and to have her voice heard. And then like all of her friends are watching Euphoria, and she's like, and her guy friends, and they think like that's how they're supposed to behave, and that's how the girls are supposed to behave. And she's like, this is not how we behave. Like this is not how we should behave. So it was hurting her cause, right? It was hurting our cause. And that's a really tough one because money makes the world go round. Like that's just a reality. So again, same with like we can't like eradicate violence against women. We can't eradicate people's, base instincts necessarily to like whatever, be excited by violence, etc. But if we could get smarter and have a more reflective experience of the media we consume, and that comes through education, like you're saying, and conversations and talking about uncomfortable, strange things. Um, I do think at least we have a little more agency and power in the consumption of the media. We're not going to be able to like, shut down the studio that continues to make, disgusting, maybe that's a judgmental term, but inappropriate content for teenagers that's about teenagers, but really it's for older people who have maybe some strange inclinations. I don't know. It's just about being active consumers. Yeah, I think that's the point. Active media, cognizant, active, conscious, conscientious media consumers.
I think you perfectly worded it.